Hi everyone, we are going to discuss layered existentialism today. The next chapter is on biology, emotions, and autopilot. In my previous videos, I spoke about layer 1, which is the autopilot, and then layer 2, which is the biology self. Today we're going to merge both of them and explore how they kind of shape our day-to-day life just a little bit further in details. To start off today, there was a quote that I came upon that I really liked, and that quote is, "We are not thinking machines that feel, rather we are feeling machines that think," by Antonio Damasio. So a couple of weeks ago, I completely removed all of my personal social media platforms from my devices because I realized this is not a sudden realization, but it was a huge waste of my time. And with everything that's going on in my season of life, I realized how little joy I find in going on social media to debate whether something is real or not, to be quite honest with you, because AI has gotten incredibly phenomenal. Honestly, a huge shout out to all of the developers, the software engineers. I don't even know the right words to describe them anymore. Probably something along those lines, but they are doing a tremendous job on everything that they've been doing. But with removing all of the social media platforms, so yes, I still use Substack as my main publishing forum for all of Layered Existentialism, the writing format. And then I still keep things such as my professional X account, my professional Instagram, YouTube, and Spotify accounts. But even with that little minor adjustment, my day-to-day has changed significantly. I typically wake up in the morning and I jump right into my emails and would start my day with a jolt. But recently, I was able to start my mornings off with either tea or a cup of coffee with a nice book to read, as I still try to read at least one book per week if I can't do it faster. But it's not a race because I'm trying to absorb the words and the meanings in the book. And I would say that I'm probably not the only one that starts my morning off by just going straight for a technological device. And this is what we kind of call autopilot in layered existentialism. So many of us, and the framework, so many of us go through our day-to-day, we're swimming in biology's emotions, autopilot, without even second guessing because it conserves energy until an indifferent universe throws its metaphoric hand at our face. And so with that, let's explore how the body and our patterns shape our life. So in previous chapter, we talked about the nervous system and how it is meant to keep us alive and for us to survive as organisms, but it is not meant for peace, fulfillment, and truth. So before we interpret the world and before we assign meaning and forming memories or beliefs, our body would act first. So the purpose of the biology is that it functions first, our autopilot fires next, and then the meaning comes later, and sometimes awareness might come afterwards, or it might not come at all. And however, this is not a claim about like an absolute sequence or even origin. It is about which force dominates the experience before conscious awareness intervenes. Biology and meaning shape each other recursively, but usually the body would speak first, and realistically, this is evolution. It is not a flaw. And understanding layers 1 and layers 2 is the beginning of understanding ourselves, because these layers shape our experience long before we decide anything at all. So speaking solely on layer 2, which is the nervous system self, biology is our first interpreter of reality. It determines how easily we feel overwhelmed or threatened, how intensely we feel emotions, how reactive our fight or flight response becomes, and how quickly we recover from the stress. It also shapes how deeply we bond with someone else or something, and how sensitive we are to rejection, and how quickly we become activated. So everything we experience is filtered through a nervous system built millions of years before modern life existed. Biology is ancient and life is modern. The mismatch is very real, and this mismatch explains why humans today often feel overstimulated, anxious, exhausted, irritable, burnt out, and disconnected. The nervous system was not designed for abundance, complexity, speed, or constant visibility. It was designed for immediate threat, clear signals, and small communities. This nervous system is not a peace detector, but it's more of a threat detector. So our biology self, the narrative, or not the narrative, but the nervous system self, so layer 2, always assumes that it's safer to overreact than underreact for the most part. As Stephen Porges' polyvagal theory explains, our autonomic nervous system via the vagus nerve operates in 3 states. The first one is the ventral vagal mode for safe connection and social engagement. The second one is the sympathetic mode for fight or flight mobilization. The third one is the dorsal vagal mode for shutdown or freeze when threats feel overwhelming. This neuroception subconsciously scans for cues or danger, even in situations that are benign, like a vague email from a boss triggering anxiety as if it's a predator, or simply things, in modern life, we sometimes would interpret a delayed text message like we're being rejected, or ambiguous tone as, being in a dangerous situation, or a conflict as loss of belonging, or change as instability, uncertainty as threat in a indifferent universe. So our biology does not care about our happiness as much as it cares about surviving. And this is why anxiety feels like truth and fear feels like realism, and why when we overthink, it feels necessary. Being responsible is the equivalent of vigilance. Our nervous system is trying to protect us, but often protects us from things that are no longer dangerous. When it comes to emotional states as biological states, we often believe emotion arises from thoughts, but the body often initiates the emotional states before the mind explains them. So in reality, the emotion arises from our body first, and then our thoughts justify them afterwards. So for example, anxiety is often accompanied by an increased heart rate. Anger often reflects boundaries being crossed. Sadness often reflects feeling disconnected. Feeling rejected is actually the attachment system activating. Emotion is not abstract, but it's our biology that is speaking. Our meaning-making layer, layer 3, interprets emotional states, but layer 2 produces them. And I will speak on layer 3 in a future video in a little bit more depth. When it comes to the biology of shame, guilt, and ego threat, because if you're watching this, perhaps you're human. I'm assuming everyone's human that's watching this, but we all have some form of shame, guilt, and ego within us to a certain degree, right? Perhaps some have more, perhaps some have less, but as humans, we are a spectrum of just a broad range of emotions. So just a little backstory. Where I live, I'm really close to a city, and there is a lot of achievement-oriented individuals. And self-worth is often unconsciously tied to status and productivity, and perhaps even not where I live. I would say that I observe this throughout the States, for example. The running joke for where I live is when anyone first meets someone, they would ask them, "So what do you do for a living?" Or like, "So what do you do?" And it usually is not a neutral question, in my opinion, because it can activate comparison, hierarchy, and belonging. And when someone is perceived as more successful, feelings of inferiority, superiority, shame, or ego threat can arise from that. And it's not a character flaw, but it's a biological signal of instability. And to explore some emotions, the ones that distort reality the most dramatically is the ones that follows. Shame. This is a full body collapse signaling I am at risk of social abandonment. Guilt. A threat to moral belonging. So, for example, I've endangered my place in the group. insecurity, a threat signal which says my position in the hierarchy is unstable, ego threat, which is a defensive activation as my identity is under attack. And these emotions feel philosophical, but they originate in physiology. They trigger some of the physiological responses, such as tightness, heat, tension, nausea, heart rate changes, and shallow breathing, because the self as the person, but the self, feels threatened for survival. So the body speaks first, and then our mind scrambles to come up with an explanation to stabilize said self. And this is why meaning making distorts under intense emotion, and the narrative is built under duress. So while the autopilot is the behavioral expression of biology, so again, this is our day-to-day actions. We don't really think about it. We just do the things that we do. Where layer 2 interprets the reality, layer 1 performs the reaction. So this includes things such as the habits, learned childhood patterns, conditioned responses, coping mechanisms, default communication styles, emotional reflexes, unconscious biases, and attachment behaviors. Autopilot is efficient, it is fast, and it's unconscious. It's not supposed to take up a lot of our energy. Autopilot is the behavioral face of our past. If we learn to shut down early, these patterns tend to replay automatically. So drawing from John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth attachment theory, these stem from early caregiver bonds forming internal working models, and that guides the adult behavior such as anxious attachment leading to overinterpretation or avoidant attachment prompting withdrawal. Therefore, if we learn to shut down, overinterpret, minimize ourselves, overperform, people please, withdraw, explode, fix, avoid, to name a few, these patterns will replay automatically, not because it is chosen, but it's because our nervous system recognizes them as familiar. So the loop of this is, for example, think of a situation where our nervous system is activated. There is something that's giving us a lot of big feelings, and then our autopilot, this is what we automatically would do. I think about this, for example, in relationships. It's like something as small as like, hey, you didn't do the dishes. And then the other person might react thinking like, hey, someone is attacking me right now. And then that is the autopilot behavior that they might have, the one that perceives themselves as being attacked, to shut down and to withdraw because they feel like they're being attacked. And then with that, the behavior creates a consequence. So with the quiet, from the shutting down and withdrawing and being quiet, the person that made that comment might feel like they are not acknowledging what the other person is saying to them. And so that consequence would then reinforce our nervous system, and then it becomes this little loop, and we replay it over and over and over and over again. So the biological activation creates this autopilot behavior, and it creates that emotional consequence, which deepens the biological imprints, and this loop continues until layer 3 or layer 4 interrupts it. So why do most of us live entirely on layer 1 and 2? As humans and as mammals, biological creatures, survival is prioritized over self-awareness because habits conserve energy, and the modern culture encourages autopilot functioning. Constant stress reduces capacity for reflection, emotional overwhelm collapses, higher layers, awareness is metabolically expensive, and most environments are not safe for introspection. And this is very much a human reality and not a moral failing. So layer 1 and layer 2 is the default human experience. Layer 3 and layer 4 require safety, time, maturity, and consciousness, which none of that is guaranteed. And the fact that most humans live within these layers does not mean escape is impossible. It's just that it requires conditions and capacity, which we will explore in later chapters. So what happens when we don't recognize these layers? We will misinterpret emotions as truths, mistake biology for identity, confuse reaction with intention, repeat patterns unconsciously, fight battles that began in childhood, blame ourselves for limitations we didn't choose, judge others without understanding constraints, believing our first interpretation is the correct one, and living reactively versus deliberately. And without awareness of layers 1 and 2, we live inside an inherited script. Even this framework is not immune to distortions, and if we hold on to it too tightly, any model can become another story that our mind uses to feel oriented rather than awake. The first path to freedom, and I hold caution when I use the word freedom because I've been poking at that word freedom for quite some time now, and I'm going to create a video on it, but in the future. But awareness does not begin with insight, but is with recognition. So noticing when something is like, hey, this reaction kind of feels old, or my body is in defense mode, I'm on autopilot, and this narrative didn't start with me, or even my nervous system is activated, not my character. And the moment we can identify this mechanism, we stop believing that we are the mechanism. It's the beginning of layer 4. Understanding layers 1 and 2 prepares us for something deeper, because we cannot understand meaning-making layer 3 without understanding what fuels it, which is the biological emotion. We cannot understand awareness, which is layer 4, without understanding what threatens it, which is biological activation. Meaning and awareness feels purely mental. However, both are grounded in physiology. The human experience is shaped by constraints we did not choose and capacities we can slowly develop. Both can be true at the same time. And understanding these layers is not about control or mastery, but it's about seeing what is at play before deciding what, if anything, we want to do with them. So for my next video, we are going to explore further about the narrative layer, which is the meaning making and illusions. The writing is, again, it's already out on Substack. Feel free to hop on ahead if you choose to do so. But I want us to slowly think about where this has been happening in our life, and if this is really what has been going on for yourself as well. If you have been in just layer 1 and layer 2. In my opinion, what I've observed is that most of us are just in survival mode. There's a lot that's going on right now. It seems like the world is kind of collapsing. I was going to say, it is kind of facts that, I mean, there is chaos everywhere from the world, probably from our internal world too, probably from things that are around us and things that are out of our control. And if we're just trying to survive, perhaps we might go and introspect and to think about the meaning of life, to think about suffering, to think about the why and things of that nature, which we'll speak further in the next video. But this is an off tangent, but I recently saw on my X that there was a post that someone wrote, I think it's Dan Coe, that said, how to fix your life in one day. I think I'm paraphrasing, but that was the title, and people kept commenting on it and how there were so many bookmarks, and I think it's so wonderful that so many people are trying to, they recognize that there's something that's going on in their life that they're not happy about, and this is why they want to fix themselves in one day. I personally thought that what a bold undertaking to try to fix a life in one day, which is the technically 24 hours if you observe time. Again, I'm going to go into all of that, or whether it's a social construct. However, I just thought to myself, so many people bookmarked this is because they wanted to improve whatever it is in their life. But going from 24 hours versus how many hours that they've sustained in life from birth, that they're going to have to undo or to rewire all of that. And I found that very interesting, and I will look further on the neuroscience behind that. I don't personally think that it's possible unless there is something that completely destabilizes someone's life for their entire life to change in one day. But that's, if someone's life gets completely destabilized in that manner, I would probably say that that would not be for the better. And it might be for them to end up trying to claw themselves into becoming a coherent self again. I have a lot of thoughts on that. But this ties into the layer 1 and layer 2, because layer 1 is the autopilot. So being able to identify, going through your day-to-day, what are some things that I can try to slowly unwire and to rewire something back on top of it. Because again, this is through layer 2, because that's the biological self, that's the nervous system self. It has to be rewired in some form, shape, or fashion. And then eventually we'll touch on layer 3 as to the meaning making, like why is it that we want to rewire ourselves? What is the meaning behind all of this as to why for all of a sudden we choose to improve ourselves at this time? But with that being said, I appreciate you for joining me on my mental ramble, because this is my mind. But as always, thank you so much for being here. Feel free to message me anytime and to leave a comment. And with that being said, I'll see you next time. Enjoy the rest of your day.